All right, I'm still playing catch up on the WWE A&E biography and WWE Rivals series. We just recently did a A&E biography review of the Randy Orton one, which kicked off the new season, and now we're finally getting to the debut edition of the new season for Rivals, which was focused on none other than Triple H and The Rock. And this was one that, look, if you are familiar with WWE, you watch WWE during this time period, you kind of know that this was one of the premier rivalries of the Attitude Era. And I thought this did a good job of kind of giving you the full story of kind of where everything started with these two, how they both kind of came in around the same time in terms of where they were being pushed, and kind of seen as two of the potential future stars, and then just how that relationship unfolded between these two, knowing that they were both essentially competing for the same thing. And they really went into that, kind of pushing the rivalry aspect, not just in the ring, but outside the ring. And Triple H had, a great quote right from the top, and it, of course, came up a little bit later. But, the quote was very simple. He did not like me. I did not like him. And that's always something we've kind of known with Triple H and The Rock. And that's, again, if you've watched wrestling for decades, you kind of know that this was the story back then, was that these were two guys that, and Triple H said it in this particular documentary, they never hung out together. They never went to dinner. They never rode together. That was just not where they were at in their off-screen relationship, because they were competing for the exact same thing on the screen. And so that was the story of this WWE Rivals edition with Triple H versus The Rock. As usual, you had the panel here, which included Freddie Prinze Jr., Renee Paquette, who of course now is in AEW, Kevin Owens, JBL, Johnny Gargano. The one thing that does stand out with, I think, this new season, and we said this in the biography thing too, these were clearly put together a while ago, right? They weren't put together a month ago or anything like that. And that can be a little bit of a drawback, I think, when you're trying to, kind of put this together. But again, this is also where you have to keep in mind the audience that this is for. Is this for people like myself and or people who, have read every little thing about professional wrestling over the past however long? Probably not. This is more of just your basic introduction into what went into the rivalry between Triple H and The Rock. And of course, we'll get to the one on Randy Savage and Jake Roberts, and other ones as well. It's kind of a basic overview of all the big points you need to know without really giving you any new information. And that's why I would say right off the start, if you're looking for something that just has new information about the rivalry, all of that, you're probably not going to get much of any of that here. A lot of the footage that was used, you could tell Triple H's, recordings and, his comments were more recent. Again, my guess is probably 22, 23, something like that, when they're initially doing kind of the filming and putting this documentary together. But everything from The Rock standpoint, which is no surprise, I mean, it was all old footage, all old comments from The Rock, probably going back as far back as probably 2012, 13, 14-ish, 15, somewhere in there. So you're not getting anything new from The Rock here that maybe you haven't seen before, and or maybe they were just waiting to kind of use for something like this. And so I think that's probably, again, if you want to kind of pick holes in this particular thing and wonder if it's worth your time, that is one aspect I would say. If you're going into this looking for new information, you're just not going to get anything that you're going to be able to sink your teeth into other than just the basic telling of this entire story. And look, though, there is still something to the fact that it's worth the watch because, for starters, it is shorter than the biography series. It's not as long. It's only an hour. So 53 minutes, I guess, if you take out commercials and all that. So it's not really a long watch. And it does kind of, again, bring up, I think, what has really become a full circle thing, because we think about, I'm recording this, weeks away from WrestleMania 40. The story for WrestleMania 40 has been the return of The Rock, but it's also been the return of The Rock and how it relates to the dynamic with Triple H, who is the head of creative in this executive position, all of this other stuff. So the full story here is that the story has come full circle with Triple H and The Rock. It's almost like they're back to where they were at the beginning, although things have changed drastically, and both men are kind of still, maybe there is some of that rivalry, although we know the relationship has changed just because it's much different now. But you have Triple H as an executive, you have The Rock on the TKO board, all this other stuff. So it is kind of funny that the story that's told here, basically going back to, Triple H comes in, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, using the Greenwich sort of character. You've got The Rock, all the Survivor Series 96 stuff. You kind of get some footage here showing like a match they had. I think it was Shotgun Saturday Night back in the day. I think it was Bret Hart actually. They kind of had a quote talking about how they were on a flight to Dubai, and Triple H made a comment, and I think this is kind of what Bret Hart said was, this guy thinks he's a superstar in terms of Triple H's opinion of The Rock at that time. So again, we're talking, late 90s, right before the full-on Attitude Era kicks off. And that, Triple H is kind of recalling, say, hey, I don't remember messing with The Rock that much back in that day. That's kind of the theme, is that these two guys just were not, I'm sure that they had strong feelings towards one another, and we'll get to that in a second, but you just had two guys that were never going to be best friends. And a lot of that had to do with the professional landscape that they found themselves in. They found themselves competing for the same spot. Triple H kind of recalls Vince wanting him to lose the Intercontinental title to The Rock. That was back on that Raw Thursday in 97. And, Triple H, he said it. He's like, I was pissed. I was absolutely pissed at this because you can kind of see the reaction to it at the time. It was the split fan reaction, right? Rock's being pushed as his next big thing, babyface. And the fans were kind of feeding into the heel Triple H and all this other stuff. Of course, that led into all the Rocky sucks chants, and then that's the evolution of the Rock's character, right? And they both sort of evolve similarly in that they become members of the faction. Triple H kind of the second in command to Shawn Michaels. The Rock becomes second in command to Farouk in the Nation of Domination. And then we know eventually what happens. Both of these guys take over their respective factions, and, The Rock makes the change character-wise. After Jim Ross had pitched that he joined the Nation of Domination following an injury and all that, Rock thought it was a great idea. And that's where, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, they formed their little pact where they're forming D-Generation X, and then Triple H realizes, okay, now he's become the leader of his faction after Michaels is out of the picture, and that's where I think you see the true rivalry between these two kick into another gear, because it's not just kind of, okay, here are the two blue chippers coming in and seen as the next big things. They are now positioned in those spots to where it is as clear as it's ever been. These are two guys being put in a spot for one reason, and that is to get them to the next level, to be the next generation of main event stars in WWE. And so, again, that's where the competition just grows. And Kevin Owens brings up kind of the comments here. And I'm not going to get a lot into the panel because, in all honesty, I have nothing against the people who are on the panel here and having all the people I mentioned earlier, but it doesn't really add a whole lot to this. Like, this is just basically the documentary, and you just have a few comments here or there chiming in from the people sitting around the table. So it's not really a big part of this documentary in any way, shape, or form. But Owens does mention here that, and it's the best, kind of point you can know in terms of this rivalry, they both knew they were the next top guy. Like, in their minds, both are thinking, I'm the next top guy in this company. And so you have that butting of heads knowing that, hey, he has the same goal I do. He wants to earn the same thing I want. And somehow we can't both be the top guy. And so we're going to have to kind of go through each other. That's really what this comes down to. And it has been throughout, again, their entire careers in the ring. You kind of then you start to get those series of matches that does take this to the next level. Fully Loaded 98, they do the 2 out of 3 falls. There's a match there. And so that was a big one. And again, Triple H kind of bringing up, there was animosity there because, once again, they wanted the same thing at this time. And it was after that, I think, Fully Loaded 98, Triple H recalls, Vince McMahon wanted Triple H to move into something different because he knew that those two didn't see eye to eye. He knew Triple H and The Rock were not best of friends. He knew that there was that animosity there. And Triple H is like, no. He's like, I want to make this work because when we're in the ring together, like, it's magic. And as always, like in any competitive field, what's going to happen? If you have two people that want the same thing, whether directly or indirectly, they're going to force each other to be better. And that's what happened here. When you think about the lasting impact of the careers of Triple H and The Rock, the fact is, what do these two guys do without each other? If one's not there to push the other. Now, could The Rock still become the biggest movie star in the world? Sure, because it was The Rock. He had all the charisma in the world, all that. Does Triple H still become what he became without that drive of trying to be better than The Rock, to be, prove himself that he should be the guy in that position? And I think there's always something to that. You have to look at it sort of how one, affects the other. And I think it's very clear with these two that they did push each other to be better. And whether it was, like we said, the fully loaded 98 match, which was really good, the 2 out of 3 falls, then, of course, The Rock eventually becomes the champion. But that comes after the SummerSlam 98 ladder match for the Intercontinental Championship. Of course, all I can remember from the SummerSlam 98 ladder match without watching it recently is two things. Triple H's purple tights, which were just legendary, and you had the yellow ladders, which, for whatever reason, I think that I remember I had the action figures back in the day, where you had the yellow ladders, and Triple H. So that was a very coveted action figure for me. I think was the Triple H purple tights ones. I thought those were just they were tremendous. I thought they were the best. And so that match catapulted them, like I said, into The Rock eventually becoming corporate Rock. He becomes the champion. All the mind game stuff, Survivor Series '98. Triple H, he admits, look, I was jealous. And again, that's where this comes in, the rivalry aspect. Like, this guy was jealous. And talked about how there was just always that wedge between him, and that is where kind of he brings up. It is wild to think, kind of in that era, we have top stars and all that. And sure, there's been plenty of eras in wrestling history where the top stars haven't been friends, and in many cases, have disliked each other, and we're never going to kind of say a word to each other outside the ring. But it didn't affect their in-ring performance, because in the ring, it became something special because there was that added real-life tension there. And I think you saw that with the promo exchanges that Rock and Triple H had during that era. And, again, that kind of eventually leads to Triple H basically saying, hey, I wanted out of DX because I could see what was coming. I could see that The Rock was doing things that made the fans like him, right? And so eventually The Rock turns into a full-on babyface. They had no choice because the fans were just not going to deny The Rock at that point. They were into The Rock, the third-person stuff, everything. And so he becomes the top babyface. Triple H is like, hey, what does that mean for me? That means that there's a top heel spot available, and that's where we saw the evolution, pun intended, of Triple H, right? He becomes this new character. He breaks away from DX and becomes his own thing. He becomes the game. He becomes all, the different kind of layers of that character. And so, yeah, and you kind of have the Undertaker kind of chiming in again. They just wanted to push each other, and it made them both better because they did, push each other. So Triple H won that championship, SummerSlam '99. So both these guys now have captured the world title within that span of basically less than a year. And so they've moved into that point, and of course it continues on. You get into the stuff in 2000 where you have The Rock, even though the disputed finish with the Big Show in the 2000 Royal Rumble, goes on to have the four-way match. And this is where, Triple H admits, and I'm sure he said this previously, but, if there is something you want to take away from this, clear as day, and we all knew at the time, and we've known since then, that this is the way it should have been. Everybody was campaigning for the WrestleMania 2000 main event to be Triple H versus The Rock, because everything had been building to that for years, essentially, not just in that WrestleMania cycle. Everything for years had been building towards these two having that final sort of big showdown at a WrestleMania main event. But then what happens? We know what happens. It becomes the four-way, McMahon in every corner, and Triple H just said, hey, it was bittersweet because it should have been a singles match. And if we did get the singles match a month later, at Backlash, Rock wins the title, gets the revenge that, again, most people thought probably should have happened at WrestleMania 2000. And then really, like I said, this is where you get kind of that transition. Rock becomes the big Hollywood star. Triple H becomes the executive. Everything goes into Triple H is doing stuff in NXT, the Authority, on-screen stuff in WWE. That sets up to the eventual, WrestleMania exchange between the two in 2015, where you have, Rock coming back and Triple H and Stephanie are in the ring, and, that was where Ronda Rousey got involved and all that. And, you kind of get that footage after WrestleMania that year of these two just kind of complimenting each other, talking about, what they've accomplished. And, that kind of wraps up the episode with just them talking about just the unique bond and chemistry that these two have built over the years. And like I said earlier, it is just so fascinating now because it has come full circle to where we're almost back where we started with these two, where The Rock is now, a board member in TKO. Triple H is running things basically in WWE. And so is that rivalry still there? I'm sure. I'm sure there's still some of that professional rivalry between these two, knowing that, maybe Triple H is in a position where who's the guy that eventually takes his job or has some impact on that? Is it The Rock? There's certainly the pieces you could connect together and all of this other stuff. I'm not saying The Rock would be the head of creative, but you just talk about the power dynamic. And that's what it was about. These two and sort of the clash for power in being a top star in what an era, right? In an era, the Attitude Era, the hottest in history. And you just think about all the pressure, all the money, everything that was included at that time. And that was kind of how everything, kind of built up into the rivalry that they had on the screen, off the screen. And I think that's kind of the big story is, if you want to watch this, you're going to get just kind of that. There's nothing wrong with the nostalgia aspect of going back and seeing, because again, these two were legendary rivals for a reason, because they did a lot of things that connected with the audience and created lasting memories for professional wrestling fans. But it also was kind of the aspect of, if you've seen this before, if this is fresh on your mind, you're probably not going to get a whole lot out of this other than maybe just the newer comments from Triple H, which just kind of sort of reiterate what we probably already knew about a lot of this stuff. But they do go into a little bit of just the behind the scenes tension and again, rivalry there too. It wasn't just in the ring, it was outside the ring as well. And so, yeah, that was the story of this Triple H versus The Rock WWE Rivals episode. Like I said, I don't think this was, it's an easy watch at 53 minutes. If you're a wrestling fan, you're going to enjoy looking back at what Triple H and The Rock did. But I would also just kind of say that if you're someone who is going into this looking for new information, you're just not going to get much of it here in this. But hey, these are enjoyable. I love documentary style stuff, which is why I'm reviewing here on the channel. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the biography series has just continued to be better overall. It's a little longer. It goes maybe a little bit more fresher content you get out of it. But still, these are fun to kind of give you a starting point for a rivalry and really just tell the picture, the full story of two guys and how they became such huge rivals. And you get that same feeling here with Triple H and The Rock. So, yeah, one of the best rivalries out there, and these two absolutely delivered. No matter what they thought of each other behind the scenes, no matter what professional jealousy there was, they always seemed to deliver in the ring, and they created that magic by using some of that real-life tension that may still exist to this day. Although I think these two, older and wiser now, probably a little bit less of that. But like I said, who knows? Because they do find themselves in a somewhat familiar spot now, given their professional jobs these days. So anyways, there you go. There are my thoughts on the Triple H versus Rock Rivals series here for WWE. So you can check it out, of course, at A&E, any other platform you do to stream, to watch that. You can find it. Let me know what you thought. If you watch this, let me know what you thought of this episode. And again, we'll have more reviews soon. Looking at the Jake Roberts, Randy Savage one, I'm excited about that one because that's one that I haven't necessarily watched in a while or hasn't been kind of fresh on my mind. And we know there were some very interesting moments in the Randy Savage, Jake Roberts feud. And we will also get caught up on the biography series. Like I mentioned, if you want to check out the review I've already done on the Randy Orton biography, that's here on the channel. And we'll also look at the next one in the series, which is Sergeant Slaughter. Another one I think that's going to be pretty fascinating, especially if you enjoy kind of looking back at the old school aspect of stuff. I'm excited to see kind of what they put together for Sergeant Slaughter. So appreciate you guys watching. As always, hit the subscribe button. New channel here. Just enjoy talking wrestling. And would love to know your feedback on this edition of the WWE Rivals series, Triple H and The Rock.